Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, hope you're doing well. Okay, let's do a quick recap of week 11 of the marathon training so far. Week 11 is also the 5th and final week of the 5-week lactate threshold and endurance training block. Okay, so Monday is just 10 kilometers of recovery. The grass at Banks City Sports Complex was still a bit wet, so I just went on pavement instead around Sopham Creek Reserve. It was drizzling a little bit, but it wasn't too bad overall. Tuesday was supposed to be a 13 kilometer aerobic run, but I ended up going to the City Park Athletics track in the evening with OPIC and other runners as well, and I joined the intervals workout, which was something like 10 by 400 meters with 60 seconds walk or standing recovery. I also ended up doing about 4 extra reps of Hank. It was mostly to provide him with some company and also like pacing effort as well. Anyways, I took it fairly chill for the intervals and didn't go too quick or anything, so I guess it averaged out to be like a fairly general aerobic run anyway. The nice thing about running on the track is that it's fairly low impact than running on pavement, I think, and it's much more controlled since it's like flat and like even the whole way. So I like to do like a proper interval session on the track sometime when it's like scheduled on my training program rather than general aerobic run. For example, Wednesday was a 24k medium long run. I did around the Sopham Creek Reserve around the usual steady loop. I tried to scale back the effort a little bit since I did the interval session on the track just the evening before, and overall the run went alright as usual. Thursday was 10 kilometers of recovery. Finally, I was able to run on the grass again after like almost 2 weeks due to all the heavy rain in the previous week and just wet weather in general. Unfortunately, the grass is still quite soaked. Plus, it's winter, so it takes ages for the grass to really dry out. And it's not too fun since my shoes and socks get soaked immediately on the grass. But it's alright since I can still get my recovery run done fairly well for the most part. Friday was supposed to be a 19k run with 11k's at lactate threshold. I did around Sopham Creek Reserve around my fast loop. I tried playing around the lacing again on my Socking Dolphin Pro Freeze and might have tightened the laces too much, so I got a bit of discomfort again. It was a bit of lace bite on the inner side of my ankle. However, it is the last and longest lactate threshold run in a whole train plan, so I'm pretty much used to it by now and was able to get the run done fairly well without like overcooking it for the most part. I also had cadence stock for the last like 3.5 kilometers of the lactate threshold section, but it's not a problem. I'm pretty sure I didn't run at 180 to 109 beats per minute based on my perceived effort. Saturday was supposed to be a 13 kilometer general aerobic run, and of course I went to Rhodes Park to get it done. I took it fairly chill and relaxed with the guys. I think it's because we were saving our efforts for the Sydney 10 event the next day, so I ended up doing about like 10.5k's instead of like 13 kilometers, but it should be fine. And then finally Sunday was supposed to be a 39 kilometer long run, but I didn't really feel like doing that. Plus I also signed up for the Sydney 10 event some time back, so I figured I may as well just do some kind of long run first, maybe about 25k's or so, and then finish it with a 10k race for like a total of 35k's or so. I could technically do the 10k race first and then finish it with a long run afterwards, but personally not really a fan of doing that, mostly because sometimes we like mingle afterwards and I'd rather not run when I've already cooled down too much or even when it gets too sunny later on. It's a bit tricky because the Sydney 10 event starts at like around 7:20 a.m. and I had to plan my long run to be able to get to the race in time with some time to spare, of course, for like a toilet break for example, and that meant choosing a suitable route and also timing the run properly based on the pace as well. So yeah, I woke up at 4 a.m, started the long run just after 5 a.m, and ran from my place all the way to Riverwood, then along the M5 linear park, and then Cooks River before reaching City Limb Park. It ended up being like about 27.5k's in total, and since it was quite early, the route was super quiet although very dark for the first half. I think it got progressively quicker during the long run because it's pretty cold and it took a while to get warm, and also I was probably a bit conscious about the timing as well. However, I did manage to reach the start line with about 10 to 15 minutes to spare fortunately. I also brought my soft flask as usual with my long runs, plus a banana as well just to have after the race, and also brought a gel this time, mostly to try out before the race for like a little boost, since it was gifted to me some time back, so thank you Mark for that. I never really tried the Huma brand, but it claims to be like all natural, vegan, gluten-free, soy-free, and made of like real foods such as like chia seeds and other natural ingredients. So based on the label, it's pretty like wholesome and enticing I guess. It tasted quite neutral and pleasant, and like much less sweet and gooey compared to like goo gel I guess, so it was much easier to go down. It's also the first gel I've taken in this entire training block, or pretty much since like last year's Sydney Marathon race, so I wasn't sure how effective it was going to be, but at least it's better than nothing heading into the race. Anyways, I did end up meeting a few of the other guys around the warm and the start area, although we lost each other pretty quickly once we started this lineup. I did manage to find Chris at least, so I figured let's get the race done together. Sydney 10 is one of the quicker 10k events in Sydney and probably like New South Wales actually, given its fairly flat course and competition, so if you're after personal best, it's a great event for it. So I was feeling quite solid for the first few kilometers, especially through the first lap of like 5 kilometers. I definitely wasn't going at what I believe was my 10k race pace, especially after that long run, but I still felt quite relaxed and controlled, especially based on the heart rate and also my perceived effort mostly. I was able to run alongside Chris for a good while, which is great, although he did end up getting like some sore knee issues like about halfway through, probably because of how cold it was that day, so yeah, he had to slow down a bit. And then around the 7k mark, I started to fade. By this point, I wasn't feeling too tired, but I was thinking I probably should have had my banana before the race rather than saving it to the end. I lost quite a bit of mental focus there, and I ended up getting like numb toes again as well, which was a bit annoying. I thought I fixed it with the new lacing and like thin socks, but I guess it can still happen sometimes. Anyways, I'm quite used to dealing with numb toes by now, so I was able to hold on somewhat all the way to the end and end up finishing about like 36:54 officially, which isn't a 10k personal best by any means, but it was at least a few seconds faster than what I got at the Sydney 10 last year when I did the event. Later on, I caught up with OPIC and a few of the other guys after the race. A lot of them ended up getting like personal best as well, so that was great. I also grabbed some electrolyte water and also fruit at the end, which was much appreciated. I definitely should have had my banana before the race if I knew they had like free fruit post-race, but it's all good. Overall, I really enjoyed enjoy myself out there. Things went better than planned for the most part. I'm glad I made it to start the race in time with my long run and also managed to finish the race fairly well. I do think it would have been nice to just let it rip and like race the 10k on its own, but it wasn't a tune-up race for me, and the training long run definitely comes first. So the total march for week 10 was about 119 kilometers. Bit of a heavy week in terms of volume and effort, but managed to get done fairly well, I think. Next week will be the start of the race preparation training block, so there'll be some tune-up races to get some race experience in, on top of the usual high volume throughout the week. It'd be nice if I'm able to get like a 5k PB in upcoming weeks, but if not, then it's all good. Anyways, let's quickly talk about what I eat before my runs and why I don't really take gels during training. I made a video about this topic last year as part of like the City Marathon training series, and most of that stuff is still quite true for me nowadays. I still have a pre-run meal before most runs that I do, except maybe the recovery runs that I do on grass near my place, mostly because those recovery runs don't take too long and I do them at like a fairly relaxed pace as well. So I'll at least have something to eat before my aerobic runs, my medium long runs, threshold runs, intervals, any type of run that I do at parkrun, and then even races as well. My go-to pre-run meal is still overnight oats. It's very cheap and simple to prepare, and it's always ready in the fridge when I need it next morning. The longer the run is, the more overnight oats I'll have. So the way I like to prepare it is to mix some plain quick oats or just rolled oats, some chia seeds, mostly for texture since it absorbs water and milk quite well and also expands a bit, but also for antioxidants, fiber, and lots of other good stuff. And then dates or sultanas, again for fiber and antioxidants, plus other good stuff, but also because they have plenty of carbs. Honey for a bit of sweetness and also for the carbs. And then I'll add soy milk, almond milk, oat milk, or sometimes even just water depending on how I feel. And then mix it all together in a container, a jar or bowl, whatever. And then chuck in the fridge in the evening, and by next morning it's ready to go. I think it can stay somewhat fresh for a few days in the fridge as well, so that's a plus. Personally, I like having my oats just straight up cold from the fridge, but you can definitely heat it up if you want to. I'll then top it off with some peanut butter for like some sneaky extra flavor, and sometimes fruits such as like various berries and also like a banana. And usually a serving of overnight oats is plenty for me, but if I have like a super long run, like anything above 35 kilometers for example, or a goal marathon pace long run where the effort's a bit higher than a usual long run, or even the actual marathon race itself, I might sneak in some bagels or like a raisin toast or even like an extra banana, and that tends to be plenty overall. Sometimes I even carry like a banana separately, do my long runs just to have it afterwards. So how much carbs should we have before running? I've read a bunch of stuff online, and I think the general idea seems to be some kind of like pre-run meal that's high in carbs, ideally like simple carbs, moderate in protein, and low in fat and fiber. A bit of protein and fiber is mostly to keep us feeling kind of full, but not too much. And fat is usually avoided because it's harder for the body to like break down and process. I also read somewhere that we should aim to have like about 1 gram of carbs per like kilogram body weight, but yeah, I don't really follow that strictly. The other notion I've seen is to run on an empty stomach or like fasted, to teach and get your body to rely more on fat as a main fuel source rather than the carbs from like your glycogen stores in your liver muscles. I used to run fasted quite often in my early days, and I got away with it for a while before I kept fading in the later stages as my runs got longer and longer. So I tried having pre-run meals before most of my runs, and it's been working well for a good while now. I might try more fasted runs sometime later on to experiment, but definitely not at this late stage of the marathon training. I've actually never properly measured the portions of ingredients in my overnight oats because I just add stuff by feel, but if I had to guess, it probably adds up to about like 100 to 150 grams of carbs for when I prepare the oats on the weekdays, and maybe 150 to 200 grams of carbs for like the Sunday long runs or like the longer efforts. Sometimes it'll be even more carbs in total if I factor in the bagels or the raisin toast. I think I've also read some articles online where runners should be having like around 60 grams of simple carbs per hour while running, sometimes even more, like up to 90 grams, or sometimes a bit less, like 30 to 40 grams. I haven't looked into it that much, so I'm not really sure how those figures are determined, but I guess it might depend on like body weight, relative effort and pace, and so on. I think there's a bunch of ways that we can get carbs in while we're running. There's gels, carb mixes, some people also have candies, lollies and chews as well, and so on. I've personally only tried gels in the past, and I've even thought about blending my own gels or doing my own carb mix for example, and then bring it with me in my soft flask, but I haven't really got around to doing that so far. Most of my runs throughout the week don't really go beyond like 1.5 hours or so, maybe a bit more if it's like a longer medium long run, but other than that it's usually less. And my long runs on Sunday tend to cap out at like around 2 to 2.5 hours, which is usually anything between like 27 to 35 kilometers. And although I haven't done the math, somehow the overnight oats has either been plenty or maybe just enough that I haven't like felt hungry throughout the runs. And so having overnight oats is probably the simplest reason for why I don't really take gels during my runs. Maybe I haven't pushed it hard enough during training, but I'm not really keen on doing that. I actually have faded in training a few times so far, not too badly, but still enough to make me think I should have had more carbs beforehand if I knew I was going to do this. And that's because I ran some extra distance or did something that wasn't really part of the train plan, like a 10k race after a long run for example. Now when it comes to the actual marathon race, I'll definitely carry some gels because I'll likely be racing at an effort for distance and duration that I've never really done in training entirely. A bit of unknown I guess, which means I probably need a bit more energy and therefore carbs to keep me going. I'm also aware that overnight oats are probably not super healthy by any means, since there's quite a lot of sugar in it from the honey and the dates or the sultanas, but it really depends on what you'd like to add and how much. I can sort of look the other way for now, especially when having it in the context of like a pre-run meal. I guess if we're running a lot, we need plenty of carbs anyway, especially simple carbs, and sugar is one of them. However, oats are grains, and I believe they're actually a complex carb, which means they're slow to digest, provide longer lasting energy, and keeps you somewhat fuller for extended periods, which is great of course, but it might not be able to provide provide the energy as soon as you like. It's almost like it keeps me going in the middle and later parts of the run, but doesn't really provide much of a kick or anything early on. Maybe that's why some runners have coffee as well, or keep it simpler with some toast instead, for example. And then in terms of fiber, the oats, the dates, the sultanas also contain a decent amount of fiber as well, which is normally great to have in your diet, but maybe not the best to have lots of while running. So indigestion or stomach issues definitely possible mid-run. Plus the chia seeds and peanut butter is kind of fatty as well. Maybe not that much since it tends to be a small portion, but it's still something, I guess. So going back to the idea that a pre-run meal should have like high simple carbs, moderate protein, and low fat and fiber, it seems overnight oats doesn't really tick those boxes properly. However, I still find overnight oats to be a decent fuel source for running, or at least in my personal experience, but it's a bit risky still, especially if you're not used to it. There's also a limit to how much oats we can have in one sitting, since it's still a liquid-based meal, and I've almost overdone it a few times too, and felt way too bloated at the start of my runs. I think when I first had overnight oats before my runs, it didn't sit well in my stomach, but over time, I somehow just got used to it. I do feel like I still need a bit of time in between when I finish my oats and when I actually start running for things to settle a bit in my stomach. Maybe at least 20 minutes, but longer is definitely better, especially for like fast efforts or races. Anyways, that's pretty much how I approach my pre-run meal, and also why I didn't really take gels during training. It might not be the ideal way, but it is what has worked for me personally, and I still may try other things later on. It's always good to experiment and see what works for you, whether that's running while fasted, or maybe filled to the brim with overnight oats like me, or carrying some gels or carb mix to have throughout the run, or maybe not at all, and so on. Feel free to let me know what works for you, and whether you have any recommendations for me to try as well. Other than that, that's pretty much all to say for now. Thanks for watching, have a nice day. Bye!